On March 4th, 2025, my daughter had me declared mentally incompetent. I was standing in my own salon, holding a cup of coffee I had just brewed, when the sheriff handed me the papers. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't break. I looked at my daughter across the room. The woman I had carried for 9 months. The woman I had worked double shifts to put through cosmetology school. And I said very quietly, "I see what you've done." What she didn't know was that I had seen it coming for 11 days. And I had been ready. My name is Dorothy Mae Collins. I am 63 years old. I built Radiance Beauty Salon from nothing but a folding table, a used dryer chair, and $400 borrowed from my church friend, Miss Elnora. That was 22 years ago. This is the story of how my daughter tried to take everything I built and how I made sure she failed. If you're listening from somewhere tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. What happens in the final chapter is something I never expected. The number 7 bus from East Point to Cascade Road takes 31 minutes on a Tuesday morning. I know because I rode it for 4 years before I could afford a used Buick. Before that, I walked. Before the walking, I cleaned office buildings from 11 at night until 6 in the morning, came home, slept 3 hours, and spent my afternoons building a clientele out of my kitchen. I was 41 years old when I opened Radiance. My daughter was 15. My husband had been gone for 2 years by then. Not dead, just gone. He left a note on the kitchen counter that said he needed to find himself. And I thought, well, while you're out there looking, I'll be here building something real. My daughter watched me work. She watched me mix color at the kitchen sink, watched me press and curl until my fingertips were calloused, watched me tape handwritten flyers to telephone poles in the rain. When she was 17, she told me she wanted to be a stylist too. I said, "Baby, you can be whatever you want, but if you want this, I'm going to teach you right." I enrolled her in cosmetology school the following year, paid every penny of tuition out of the salon's income, $12,000 total. She graduated top of her class. I was so proud. I cried in the parking lot of the school, so she wouldn't see me. She came to work at Radiance when she was 20. For 3 years, it was beautiful. We did hair side by side, mother and daughter, and our clients loved us for it. People would book double appointments just to sit in our chairs at the same time. We had a rhythm together that felt like music. Then she met her husband. I want to be fair when I talk about him because fairness matters even when it's hard. He was not a bad man in the way some men are bad. He didn't drink or raise his hand. What he was ambitious in a direction that required other people's money. He had plans. Big plans. A hair product line, a chain of salons, a brand. Plans that needed capital. Capital that, as he once told my daughter over Sunday dinner while I sat 3 feet away, was just sitting there being underutilized. He was talking about Radiance. I watched my daughter change over the next 2 years the way a slow weather shift changes a season. The changes were small at first. She started arriving late. She stopped asking my opinion on purchases. She hired her husband's cousin as the front desk manager without telling me. When I asked about it, she said, "Mama, you can't run this place forever. I'm just preparing for the future." I was 61. I had not said one word about slowing down. In January of 2024, she sat across from me at the desk in the back office and slid a folder toward me. She called it a transition plan. It was 16 pages long. The short version was that she wanted me to deed the business to her, take a fixed monthly payment, and step back from daily operations. She used phrases like generational transfer and financial planning for your retirement years. She had clearly rehearsed. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at her. Then I said, "I'll think about it." I thought about it for exactly 1 evening. My answer was no. Radiance was my life's work. I was healthy, sharp, and not ready. What I did not say, but what I thought, was that her husband's fingerprints were all over those 16 pages. and I did not trust where this transition was heading. She stopped speaking to me normally after that. Not dramatically. Not with a fight. She just went quiet and efficient, the way people do when they've decided to take a different route to the same destination. In September of 2024, I noticed something strange. A woman came in for a touch-up, a regular named Mrs. Patricia Odom, who had been my client for 11 years, and she mentioned, almost in passing, that she had heard I was thinking about retiring. I said I wasn't. She tilted her head. Your daughter told me you'd been having some memory issues, said you'd been forgetting appointments, getting confused with clients. I felt something cold move through my chest. I told Mrs. Odom that my memory was perfectly fine, and I meant it. That night I started writing things down, not because I needed to, but because I understood suddenly that I might need to prove that I didn't need to. In October, my daughter brought a man to the salon to look at the equipment. She introduced him as a business consultant. I watched him walk through my space, writing on a clipboard, while I was standing right there trimming Miss Elnora's edges. I asked my daughter, very calmly, to step outside, on the sidewalk in front of the salon I had built. I told her that no one evaluated my business without my permission. She looked at me with something I had never seen before on her face. It was not anger. It was calculation. Mama, she said, I'm just trying to make sure you're protected. I knew then. Not the specifics, but I knew. I called my accountant that same week. A woman named Brenda who had done my books for 9 years. I asked her to pull everything. Every account. Every filing. Every license. What Brenda found took her 3 days to piece together. She called me on a Thursday evening and asked me to come in before the salon opened Friday morning. I sat across from Brenda at her small desk while she laid out papers one by one. My daughter had filed a request with the state of Georgia for an emergency guardianship hearing, claiming that I had been exhibiting signs of cognitive decline, affecting my ability to manage my financial and business affairs. Attached to the request were 2 letters from physicians I had never visited, and 1 affidavit from my daughter describing incidents of confusion, erratic behavior, and poor business decisions over the past 8 months. I read the affidavit twice. The incidents she described had been invented or distorted beyond recognition. A day I arrived at the salon 30 minutes late because of a car accident on I-285 had become found disoriented and unable to locate the business. A disagreement I had with a product supplier about an overcharge had become confused about standard vendor contracts and made accusations without basis. My hands were flat on Brenda's desk. I pressed them down deliberately so they would not shake. Brenda said, Dorothy, if this guardianship goes through, you lose legal authority over the salon, your bank accounts, your property. She becomes your legal guardian. You would need her permission to make any financial decision. I said, How long have I got before the hearing? Brenda said, 14 days. I sat for a moment. Then I said, All right, tell me exactly what I need. That morning I called a woman I had not spoken to in 6 years. Her name was Gloria Washington. She had been my daughter's bridesmaid, her closest friend since 2nd grade, until something happened between them that my daughter never fully explained and I never fully pried into. When Gloria answered, I said, Gloria, this is Dorothy Collins. I need help, and I believe you're the only person who can give it to me. Gloria came to my house that same evening. She sat at my kitchen table and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I know about the doctors. I said, What do you mean? She said, My cousin works at the medical office where those letters came from. She called me 3 weeks ago because something didn't feel right. The physician's signatures on those letters are real, but the physicians never examined you. Someone used their letterhead. Dorothy, your daughter paid someone to forge those assessments. The kitchen was very still. Gloria reached into her bag and pulled out copies of the originals and what the office actually had on file. No record of any examination of Dorothy Mae Collins. No appointment. No visit. Nothing. I had been cognitively declining on paper in places I had never set foot. I have a friend named Reverend James who once told me that when a door closes, God doesn't always open a window. Sometimes he hands you a crowbar. That is what Gloria was. A crowbar. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Angela Merritt, and she came recommended by Brenda as someone who handled elder law and estate disputes. I had never in my life paid for a lawyer. The consultation fee was $350, and I handed over my card without blinking. Angela was 54, direct, and wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, like a woman who had decided long ago that practicality mattered more than vanity. She listened to my account, reviewed Gloria's documents, looked at the guardianship filing, and then she sat back and said, "Dorothy, what your daughter filed is based on fabricated medical evidence. That is not a civil matter. That is fraud." She pulled up her calendar. "The hearing is in 11 days. Here's what we're going to do." For 11 days, I kept working. I opened the salon every morning. I did hair. I laughed with my clients. I did not let my daughter see one crack in my composure, because I understood that every normal day I showed up was evidence. Angela had advised me to keep a log. Time, date, every appointment, every decision, every conversation. I wrote in a small notebook every evening at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once sat planning Radiance with a folding chair and a borrowed calculator. I also asked Gloria to do something difficult. I asked her to keep talking to my daughter as if nothing had changed, to stay close, to listen. Gloria said, "You know this might cost me." I said, "I know, and I'm asking anyway." She said, "Then I'll do it." What Gloria learned over those 11 days was worse than I had been prepared for. My daughter and her husband had been meeting with a commercial real estate broker. They were planning to sell the Cascade Road property, which I owned outright, and use the proceeds to launch their product line. The guardianship was not about protecting me. It was about liquidating me. When Angela heard this, she made 2 calls. One to a forensic document examiner who had testified in Georgia court cases before. The second to a detective in the Fulton County Financial Crimes Unit named Marcus Webb, who had apparently seen exactly this pattern before in elder fraud cases. He told Angela he would be ready to move when we were. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. On the Friday before it, my daughter called me. She said, in a voice that was carefully warm, that she wanted to have dinner, just the 2 of us. No husbands, no business talk. She wanted to connect. I said yes. She chose a restaurant in Buckhead, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a wine list that arrives before the menu. I wore my good dress, burgundy with pearl buttons. I sat across from my daughter and I looked at her face, the face I had memorized in a hospital room 38 years ago, and I thought about how love can be completely real and completely insufficient at the same time. She spent the first 20 minutes talking about nothing, how the salon had been busy, how her husband was tired from a long project. Then she refilled my water glass and set her hands flat on the table in a posture I recognized because she had inherited it from me. And she said, "Mama, I want to talk about the future." I let her talk. She said the guardianship was not meant to hurt me. It was meant to give me peace of mind. She said that at my age, having legal structures in place was simply responsible, she said. And this is the part I will never forget. "I love you too much to watch you struggle." I set down my fork. I said, "Tell me something. The 2 doctors who wrote letters saying I have cognitive decline, do you remember their names?" Her eyes shifted, just slightly. I said, "Because I've never met either of them, and neither have they met me." She started to speak. I said, "I've also never met the broker you've been talking to about the Cascade Road property, the one you've been meeting with since August." The table between us went very quiet. She said, "Mama, you don't understand the full picture." I said, "I understand enough. I understand that on Tuesday morning, Angela Merritt will present to the court a forensic analysis of the fraudulent medical letters. A record showing I have never been a patient of either physician and a log of 22 days of fully functional business operations documented and witnessed. I also understand that Detective Marcus Webb would very much like to speak with whoever provided those forged physician signatures. My daughter's face did not fall the way you might expect. It went still, the way still water goes still, right before something moves beneath it. She said, "You have a lawyer." I said, "I do." She said, "Mama, if you fight this, it's going to get ugly. I don't want that for either of us." I looked at her, this woman I had loved before she had a name. I said, "Baby, it's already ugly. You made it that way. What happens Tuesday is just the light coming on." I paid the check. I hugged her at the door because she was still my daughter and I was still her mother, and neither of those things had stopped being true. Then I got in my car and drove home and sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside. Tuesday morning, the Fulton County Courthouse was gray and cool, the way early March is in Atlanta before the warmth decides to stay. Angela and I arrived 45 minutes early. Gloria was already in the hallway, sitting straight-backed on a wooden bench, holding a folder of documents. She stood when she saw me, and the look on her face said everything that words would have taken too long to say. My daughter and her husband arrived with their own attorney, a younger man in a well-fitted suit who I had not seen before. My son-in-law looked at me across the hallway with an expression that was working very hard to look like concern. I looked back at him with no expression at all. The judge was a woman, small and precise, with a reputation, Angela had told me, for not tolerating wasted time. Her name was the Honorable Sandra Elaine Morrow. She reviewed the initial filings for 6 minutes in silence, while the room held itself still. Then she said, "I'm going to ask the petitioner's counsel to explain to me why the 2 medical assessments submitted in support of this guardianship request appear to have been prepared on a letterhead that does not match the documented format used by those physicians' office as of the filing. Date." My daughter's attorney asked for a moment. Judge Morrow said, "You have until I finish this sentence." Angela stood. She presented the forensic analysis. She presented Gloria's cousin's documentation from the medical office. She presented my log. 22 days of dated, timed, witnessed entries. She presented a signed statement from 9 of my long-term clients testifying to my full cognitive capacity. She presented the bank records showing ongoing sound financial management of Radiance for the preceding 12 months. Then she said, "Your Honor, this guardianship petition was not filed to protect Dorothy Collins. It was filed to obtain legal control of her business and her property. The medical evidence supporting it was fabricated." The room had the particular silence of people who have stopped breathing. My son-in-law shifted in his seat. My daughter was looking at the table in front of her. Judge Morrow looked at my daughter's attorney for a long moment. Then she said, "Counsel, I'm dismissing this petition. I'm also referring the fraudulent medical documentation to the State Bar and to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges." She looked at my daughter directly. "Young lady, I don't know what you were thinking, but I hope today's outcome gives you cause to think differently." My daughter did not look up. Outside in the hallway afterward, her husband tried to speak to me. He started with my name. I walked past him, not from anger exactly, but because I had already said everything I needed to say to the people who mattered, and he was not one of them. In the car, on the way back, Angela said, "The DA's office will likely be in touch within 60 days. The forged physician letters are the issue. If they can trace who produced them, there may be charges." I looked out the window at Atlanta passing. I said, "Whatever happens, happens. I just needed the salon to stay mine." Angela said, "It's yours." I said, "I know. It always was. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, because I think it is the part that matters most, and I think it is the part that does not fit neatly into the story people expect." My daughter called me 4 days after the hearing. I did not answer. She called again 2 days after that. I did not answer. Her husband called once, and I did answer that call, only to say that I had nothing to say to him and to please not call this number again. But my daughter's calls kept coming. Not desperate, not angry, just steady. Once a week, every Saturday morning, like a habit she had decided to keep, regardless of whether it was returned. I listened to the voicemails. I did not delete them. I sat with them the way you sit with something you don't yet know what to do with. 6 weeks after the hearing, I was closing up the salon on a Thursday evening, counting the register the way I had counted it for 22 years, and I heard the front door. I had already locked it, but I had given my daughter a key years ago, and she had never returned it. She stood inside the door in jeans and a plain jacket, no jewelry, no prepared expression. She looked smaller than I had seen her look since she was a teenager. She said, "Mama, I know you don't have to talk to me. I know I don't have the right to ask. But can I just say one thing?" I said, "Say it." She said, "I told myself it was practical. I told myself you were getting older and someone needed to think ahead, and that I was the one who understood what Radiance could become. I told myself every lie a person tells when they want something and can't admit the wanting." She stopped. But none of that was the truth. The truth is I was greedy, and I let him make me greedier. And I am so sorry, Mama, not because I got caught, because of what I did to you. I looked at my daughter for a long time. I said, "Sit down." She sat in the waiting chair by the window, the chair that had been there since the first year I opened. I sat across from her. Outside, Cascade Road was doing what it always does in the evening, busy and ordinary and ongoing. I said, "I need you to understand something. What you filed said that I was losing my mind, that I couldn't manage my own affairs. You put that in a legal document with a state seal on it." I paused. "Do you understand what that would have meant? Not just for the salon, for me, for who I am." She was crying. I said, "I am not ready to forgive you. I want you to know that I am your mother, and that will never change. But I am not there yet, and I will not pretend to be." She nodded again. I said, "What happens with the DA's office is out of my hands. What I will tell you is that I'm not going to spend whatever years I have left carrying hatred for my own child. So we are going to have to find a way through this that is honest. Not quick. Honest." She looked at me and I saw in her face the girl she had been before all of this. Before ambition and a husband and 16 pages of transition plan. I don't know if that girl is still in there entirely, but I saw her. I told my daughter to go home. I told her I would call her when I was ready. It is summer now. Atlanta is the color green turns when it means it. The bougainvillea I planted along the front of the salon is doing something I did not expect, which is thriving. Miss Elnora says it looks like it knows it belongs there. The DA's office determined that the forged medical letters were produced by a document service her husband had found online. A man in a strip mall in Gwinnett County who charged $400 per letter. He was arrested in April. Her husband was charged with fraud and conspiracy. My daughter was offered a plea agreement, community service, 2 years of supervised probation, and a permanent record. She took it. She has not worked at Radiance since the hearing. We have not worked side by side again. I do not know if we will. What I know is that she calls every Saturday morning, and I have started answering. Not every time, but sometimes. Gloria is at the salon now. Not as a stylist. She is a kindergarten teacher and has no interest in switching careers, but as a friend who stops by on Friday afternoons and sits in the waiting chair and tells me things about the world that make me laugh. Some weeks that is enough. I hired a young woman named Camille who is 24 and talented and reminds me of my daughter at that age, which is a thing I am learning to hold without flinching. She asked me last week how I built Radiance, and I told her the truth, which is that I built it the only way anything real gets built, which is by deciding every single day to keep going, even when you have every reason not to. I am 63 years old. For 6 weeks, on paper, a petition existed that said I could not manage my own mind. What the paper did not know is that I have been managing my mind, my hands, and my life for 6 decades without anyone's permission or assistance, and I intend to keep doing exactly that. What I have learned is this. There is a particular kind of theft that comes wrapped in love language. It uses words like protection and planning and what's best for you. It looks, from a certain angle, like care. Learning to tell the difference between someone who loves you and someone who has decided you are a resource is one of the hardest lessons there is. I wish I had learned it sooner. I am grateful I learned it at all. Radiance is still on Cascade Road. The sign still has my name on it. The chair I have sat in for 22 years still has the small worn patch on the armrest where I rest my right elbow between clients. Every Tuesday and Thursday we do walk-ins. Every Saturday we do the church crowd. Every morning I open the door and turn on the lights, and I think about the woman who started this with $400 and a folding table, and I think she would be satisfied. Not because everything turned out perfectly. It didn't. My daughter and I are not what we were, and we may never be again. There is grief in that I don't think goes away, but Radiance is mine. My name is still on the deed. My mind is still my own. And on the evenings, when I close up and count the register and turn off the lights one by one, I walk out onto Cascade Road, and the city is doing what cities do, which is simply continuing, and I feel something that is not quite peace, but is close enough. I am Dorothy Mae Collins. They tried to put my name on papers that said I was diminished, confused, no longer capable of my own life. They were wrong.